One of the things I've been coming back to recently over the last couple of days in these walks is to do with creativity and how that term kind of figures in different ways in different different scales of operation, I suppose. Really, one of the things that's influential in my thinking there is a kind of model of creativity that's sometimes called a dynamic systems model. And I think that's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about it in those terms. But it also features in the writings of other theorists and writers on creativity. People like Perkins, who I've mentioned before, and other people. And one of the things that's really salient about that is it comes out of the question, really, how do we recognise something as being creative? Because when we think about creativity, we kind of automatically associate it with the creative individual, particularly when it's creativity in the arts. And often the kind of discussion stops there. But the actual understanding of what constitutes a creative object, let's say, there's close to thinking about, really. And what the dynamic systems model that Csikszentmihalyi talks about indicates quite clearly is that creativity, or an understanding of what creativity is in a social and cultural sense, is depends on context. It's entirely dependent on context. So we judge an object, let's say, to be creative by comparing it to other objects in the same kind of domain of practice. And if that new object has been found to display certain qualities, and they're usually assigned the qualities of novelty, intelligence and value, which I might come back to if I get time, which basically means if it's different to anything else that's already in that domain, and different in a way that's interesting, then it's considered to be a creative object. And by association, the person who produces that object is considered a creative person. And that's absolutely fine. I thought there's lots of kind of implications that fall out of that to do with how context is constructed, how to do with the kind of political and cultural influences on the free flow of information that allows creative objects to be properly regarded, all those kind of things, and historical effects. It seems to be quite possible that sometimes an object can be produced which at the time of its production doesn't appear creative, but later when the domain, the context, moves on a little bit, then suddenly this object is seen to be creative and relevant in an interesting way. I guess I'm thinking there about music. There was a period of time in the mid-70s when certain kinds of music were considered just kind of perverse or aberrant. I'm thinking of things like Iggy Pop and the Stooges, or Pink Fairies, kind of American proto-punk music, which, as I say, most people would not consider creative at the time. But when popular music, the domain of popular music moved on into the late 70s, when punk music became fashionable and relevant and interesting and had intelligence and had value in its own right, then suddenly the Stooges and the Pink Fairies and other bands like that became relevant, and people started saying, oh, these are the godfathers of punk, and it was terribly creative again, somehow. So there are some quite strange anomalies in that process. Okay, why am I talking about this? Okay, yeah, one of the things I'm thinking about there is in relation to that kind of social model of creativity, in which a new artifact or object appears in the domain of practice relevant to it, and is judged to be creative or not according to its relationship with that domain. And then there is the other understanding of creativity, which is at a smaller scale, the scale of kind of human disposition. We do think of some individuals as being creative, and as I say, that's usually derived from the evidence that they've produced something which is socially creative. But there's no getting away from the fact that most of us at some point in our lives do kind of have experiences which which feel creative, and sometimes people tell us that we're creative, and so on. So what does that mean? And what seems to be happening there is that there's a very similar process, and where I'm going with this is to suggest there's a kind of fractal relationship between the processes. A very similar process happening at a smaller scale. And I guess here I'm thinking about, well, in psychological models of creativity, starting probably